Story 1. I had always been a fan of the macabre. True crime documentaries, eerie folklore, and spine-chilling ghost stories were my guilty pleasures. But nothing could have prepared me for the night that would become my own true night drive horror story. It was a cool autumn evening when I received a cryptic message on a local forum. The message read, "Hickory Road, 3 a.m. Be there if you dare." Intrigued, I did some quick research on Hickory Road. It was an isolated, winding stretch of asphalt that ran through a dense forest, said to be home to countless supernatural legends. And it was only an hour's drive from my house. The clock struck 2 a.m., and I couldn't resist the temptation any longer. I decided to embark on the mysterious journey to Hickory Road. I jumped into my old, rattling car and hit the road, the headlights cutting through the inky blackness of the night. The further I drove, the thicker the forest grew around me, casting eerie shadows that danced on the asphalt. The silence was oppressive, only broken by the hum of my engine. I kept glancing at the clock, realizing that I was quickly approaching 3 a.m. and the designated meeting time. As I reached Hickory Road, a feeling of dread settled in the pit of my stomach. The dense trees on both sides seemed to close in on me, and the occasional hooting of an owl or rustling of leaves sounded like whispers in a language I couldn't understand. I could almost feel the weight of centuries of stories and superstitions pressing down on me. Just as I approached the appointed spot, I saw another car parked by the roadside. A shiver ran down my spine as I recognized the same cryptic message scrawled in red paint on the side of the vehicle. There was no sign of the driver, but the engine was still running. A feeling of unease washed over me, but curiosity compelled me to continue. I parked my car a few yards away and stepped out, clutching my flashlight. The forest around me was dark and imposing, the trees reaching out like skeletal fingers. I cautiously approached the other vehicle, but before I could investigate further, I heard a rustling in the underbrush. I swung my flashlight towards the source of the sound, revealing a figure emerging from the shadows. It was a tall man, dressed in tattered clothes, his face obscured by a hood. My heart pounded as he approached me, and I instinctively took a step back. He spoke, his voice barely a whisper, "You came. Like the others." My pulse quickened as I asked, "Who are you? What is this place?" He ignored my questions and continued, "The legends are true. The spirits of those who met their end on Hickory Road still linger here, seeking revenge." I was about to scoff at his words when I heard it, a faint, mournful wailing that seemed to emanate from the very trees themselves. It was like nothing I had ever heard before, a chorus of agony and despair. The man pointed towards the woods, his eyes wide with terror. "They're here," he said, his voice trembling. "The lost souls of Hickory Road." As if in response, the trees around us began to sway, their branches twisting and contorting as if possessed. Shadows danced in the darkness, taking on grotesque shapes that seemed to reach out for us. Panic surged through me, and I fumbled for my car keys, desperate to escape. But before I could make a move, the man grabbed my arm, his grip like a vice. "You can't leave," he whispered. "They won't let you." I tore myself free from his grasp and sprinted towards my car, the unearthly wailing growing louder with each step. As I slammed the door shut and started the engine, I glanced back one last time. The man was gone, and the other car had vanished. But the forest was alive with spectral figures, their eyes glowing with malevolence. I could hear their agonized moans and pleas, and I knew I had to get out of there, or I would become just another lost soul of Hickory Road. With tires screeching, I sped away from that accursed place, my heart pounding and my mind reeling. I couldn't explain what I had witnessed that night, but I knew one thing for certain: I would never venture near Hickory Road again. To this day, the memory of that true night drive horror story haunts my dreams. And I can't help but wonder if the legends of Hickory Road are more than just stories, if there are indeed lost souls lurking in the shadows, waiting for the next unsuspecting traveler to cross their path. Story 2. I've always been a night owl. The stillness of the night, the dim glow of the moon, and the eerie solitude of empty roads have always fascinated me. But little did I know that one fateful night drive would turn into a chilling encounter that would haunt me forever. It was a warm summer night, and the clock had just struck midnight when I decided to take a spontaneous night drive. I hopped into my trusty old car and hit the road, the engine's gentle purr echoing through the silent streets. My destination? Highway 66, a long stretch of road known for its desolation and eerie legends. As I merged onto the highway, the solitude washed over me like a thick fog. The only source of illumination was the soft, pale glow of my car's headlights. My eyes were fixed on the winding road ahead, and my thoughts drifted into the dark corners of my mind. That's when I noticed it, a pair of dim, flickering headlights in my rearview mirror. I thought nothing of it initially, assuming it was just another late-night traveler. But as the minutes passed, those headlights drew closer and closer, and a strange feeling of unease crept over me. I tried to shake it off, blaming it on my overactive imagination, but the unease persisted. The car behind me was getting dangerously close now, tailgating me with an unsettling intensity. I decided to switch lanes, hoping the aggressive driver would pass me by. But as I changed lanes, so did they, as if they were mirroring my every move. My heart began to race, and my palms grew sweaty. This wasn't just aggressive driving anymore, it felt like a sinister game. I tried to convince myself that it was a mere coincidence, but the dread in my gut told me otherwise. Desperate to escape this situation, I pushed the gas pedal to the floor, accelerating down the highway. The car behind me matched my speed, staying glued to my rear bumper. Panic surged through me, and my mind raced for a way out. I reached for my phone to call the police, but as soon as I glanced away from the road, I heard a deafening screech of tires. The car behind me had swerved dangerously close to my side, nearly forcing me off the road. My heart pounded in my chest as I veered back onto the highway, narrowly avoiding disaster. I knew I had to lose them, so I took an abrupt exit onto a dark, narrow country road. I hoped the unfamiliar terrain would give me an advantage, but the relentless car followed me, its headlights casting eerie shadows through the trees lining the road. My mind raced, searching for an escape plan. The road ahead was empty, and the only sound was the gravel crunching beneath my tires. I spotted a small, dilapidated church up ahead and made a split-second decision to pull into its overgrown parking lot. Maybe I could find help there. I parked my car behind the church, the engine's hum fading into silence. The other car pulled in right behind me, its headlights now blinding in the darkness. I scrambled out of my car, heart pounding, and rushed towards the church's entrance. The church doors creaked open ominously, and I stepped inside, my breaths coming in ragged gasps. The interior was as eerie as the night itself, with flickering candles casting dancing shadows on the walls. I desperately scanned the empty pews for any sign of life, but the church was empty. As I turned to leave, a voice whispered from the darkness, "You can't escape." I froze, my heart in my throat. I couldn't see anyone, but the voice seemed to be coming from all directions, like it was emanating from the very walls of the church. "Who are you?" I stammered, my voice quivering. The voice responded, "I've been waiting for you, traveler. Waiting for this night." Suddenly, the candles lining the walls burst into an eerie blue flame, casting an otherworldly glow across the church. I watched in horror as shadowy figures materialized in the pews, their eyes gleaming with an unnatural, malevolent light. I stumbled back, unable to tear my gaze away from the horrifying scene unfolding before me. The figures began to advance, their movements unnatural and disjointed. I knew I had to escape, but the church doors had slammed shut, trapping me inside. With a surge of adrenaline, I sprinted towards the altar, hoping to find some means of escape. But as I reached it, the floor gave way beneath me, and I tumbled into a dark, underground chamber. The impact knocked me unconscious. When I awoke, I was back in my car, parked along Highway 66. The eerie blue moonlight bathed the empty road, and the car behind me was nowhere to be seen. It was as if the nightmarish encounter in the church had been nothing more than a horrifying dream. I shakily started my car and drove away from that accursed highway, my mind reeling from the terror I had experienced. To this day, I can't explain what happened that night, but I'll never forget the chilling encounter on Highway 66, a night drive that turned into a true nightmare, one that still haunts my every thought when darkness falls. Story 3. I never used to believe in the supernatural. Ghost stories, urban legends, and tales of the unexplained were nothing more than figments of imagination to me. That was until that fateful night when I embarked on a road trip that would forever change my perception of reality. It was a moonless night when I set out on my journey. The darkness seemed to swallow the road ahead, and the only source of light was the feeble glow of my headlights. My destination was a remote cabin in the woods, a place I had inherited from my late uncle. He had always been a recluse, and I had never visited the cabin before. It was a perfect opportunity to get away from the city, to escape the constant noise and chaos of urban life. As I drove deeper into the woods, the silence grew oppressive. There were no other cars on the road, no signs of civilization. The only sound was the gentle hum of the engine and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. It was eerie, but I attributed it to the remoteness of the location. After what felt like hours of driving, I finally arrived at the cabin. It stood isolated, surrounded by towering trees that seemed to reach for the sky. The cabin itself looked old and weathered, but it had a certain rustic charm to it. I parked my car and made my way inside, eager to settle in for the night. The inside of the cabin was just as I had imagined it, cozy and inviting. It was clear that my uncle had spent a lot of time here. As I explored the rooms, I came across a collection of journals he had kept over the years. They were filled with his thoughts and experiences, including his encounters with strange occurrences in the woods. One entry, in particular, caught my eye. It described a night drive he had taken on the same road I had just traveled. He wrote about how the darkness seemed to come alive, how the shadows on the side of the road moved and whispered to him. He mentioned strange figures darting in and out of his peripheral vision, and a feeling of dread that had settled in the pit of his stomach. I dismissed it as the ramblings of a lonely man, but as I read on, a chill crept down my spine. He had written about hearing voices, voices that called out to him in the night, voices that seemed to come from all around him. He couldn't make out the words, but their tone was unmistakable, desperate and pleading. Despite my unease, I decided to go for a night drive myself. Perhaps the isolation of the cabin and the eerie journals had gotten to me. I needed some fresh air, and a short drive in the darkness seemed like a good idea. I got into my car and started down the same road. The headlights pierced the darkness, but the forest seemed to close in around me, the trees becoming a wall of black. It wasn't long before I felt a sense of unease, a feeling that I was being watched. As I continued to drive, I began to hear it, the faintest of whispers, like the softest breeze through leaves. At first, I thought it was my imagination, but the voices grew louder and more insistent. They seemed to come from the very darkness itself, a chorus of ghostly murmurs. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to make out the words. They were incomprehensible, a jumble of sounds and syllables that sent shivers down my spine. Panic washed over me, and I slammed on the brakes, bringing the car to a screeching halt. I sat there in the darkness, the voices still swirling around me. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel a presence, something lurking just beyond the reach of my headlights. It was then that I remembered my uncle's journal, his warnings of strange figures in the night. Terrified, I turned the car around and sped back to the cabin, never looking back. As I locked myself inside, the voices faded away, leaving me with an overwhelming sense of dread. I don't know what I encountered that night on that desolate road, but one thing is certain, I will never dismiss the supernatural again. The voices still haunt my dreams, a constant reminder of the true horror that lurks in the darkness, waiting for the unsuspecting traveler on a lonely night drive.